Thank you, David. That was really interesting. I've taken lots of notes, so I could maybe kick off with a question and hopefully turn to all of you to see what kind of questions you might have for him too. So perhaps let's kick into the idea of empathy. When you think about facts and triangulation of facts, as you talked about it being a key part of being an executive and a leader, and then you apply the idea that somehow in AI will fall short, can you perhaps explore a little bit about what you think could be done to ensure our leaders had empathy in a world where we have linear pieces of information providing us the facts?
That's a hard one, Catherine. I mean, I'm not sure I'm able to change the behaviour of leaders, but look, I mean, I have a broader perspective. So I'll cover off the leadership and empathy question first. And I mean, look, I don't really need to talk anything more than Jacinda Ardern, really, do I? There is a wonderful leader who showed incredible empathy, but was no more the less impactful for doing that. I mean, so there's a classic example. I worry that in a general sense that we sometimes lose our humanity in our pursuit of economic benefit, political gain, and I think that is a great tragedy. We need to be able to have open and, strongly expressed discussions so we can get to the truth. And in that, you need to have empathy with the other person who's trying to present a different position to maybe yourself. But leaders do need to decide. You, as imperfect as the world is, and you never have enough data. If you can get more data, that's great. But sometimes more data doesn't help, does it? It just sort of confuses things. So I think that you do need to rely on what we were talking about was judgment. And if you can start to use data properly, pursue truth, have empathy and get to good judgment, then we'll all be a lot better. And AI can help along the way.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question. Could you please introduce yourself and your organisation? Thank you.
Thanks, David. Kevin Marfan from Ernst & Young. Thank you for your presentation. I was really interested in the comment you made around that we really have to have a representation of society when we build AI to deal with some of that unconscious bias. And I think back to the story around when Siri was first invented and it couldn't recognise a female voice. So can you talk to us a bit about your perspective on how do you actually inject that diversity to make sure that we can, as much as possible, work out those biases?
Maybe I could solve the world's problems at this point, Look, it's with grave. I mean, first we've got to put an institutional sense because if it's too broad, we don't know. But look, I in a way, I don't think it's different to maybe what scientists had to go through in terms of the work they do. So, in science, when you are going to publish, and let's assume we publish from AI, you have to go through peer reviews, right? Peer reviews is a critical part, so you get peers that review what you do. Then when you get through the peer reviews, you've still got to go through a sort of a second line of defence, which is the ethics of this, and maybe then there's another group outside. So the question is, I am not one to create more regulation and more controls. I want to enable an environment, but because every one of us in this room has unconscious bias and conscious bias, that's just unfortunately the way it is, we all need to put ourselves in positions where our ideas are tested so we mitigate at least some of it. We're never going to get rid of all of it. So I think that there's maybe some learnings we can take from other areas, but today that's not happening. I'm not aware, and I may be wrong here, of any peer reviews around code that's written. Does anyone know if there is? I'm not aware. There is? No,
yes.
There is. In AI?
Yes.
Okay,
yes. I mean,
then maybe you might want to answer that because that shows my ignorance. Yeah. Yeah, because maybe you can say something later on. But why don't you go there and we'll...
Yeah, thanks. Now he's doing my job as well. Yeah, that's good.
Sorry. So I'm Dan Angus. I'm from QT's Digital Media Research Centre. There are code reviews that happen, and particularly in the academic community where you get the intersection of AI, particularly in social research, we're seeing a lot more people put their code up online through services like Archive and other kinds of GitHub and other repositories, and there being oversight and people actually testing and seeing where these algorithms might have bias or other kinds of impact in that sense.
Is that optional though?
No, in many cases, communities insist that authors put their code up there.
Okay.
You can't actually publish in those communities unless you make your code available.
Let me just go one more step, sorry. Is that a requirement under university or is it broader? Because I've got a feeling that I'm not aware of anything at a national level that says everyone must do this.
No, these are specific academic communities.
I think it's specific, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
which is great. Don't misunderstand me. But I'm talking at a universal level. Okay, but that's great.
Also Microsoft, Graham might want to talk about, but does have software now that can flag where biases might occur.
Do that, do.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So are you saying, well, there is
Yes.
some code around that will analyse
Sorry about that, Graham.
You're the lawyer, yeah, that's right. He could be incriminated for doing this. I think there's definitely, ways you can analyse code that can look for bias.
Yes.
But what happens after you found it?
Yeah, so I just want to maybe drill into that a little bit, because what we have is bias is in a part a societal construct, isn't it? So we have an idea 100 years ago that there were differences between blacks, whites and yellows, and now we have an idea that we believe there's equality. These are facts that have been backed up all the way along our value set shifting. So the relationship between facts and values are really important. So I want to sort of think about bias.
Don't forget truth in there, though.
Yeah, well, but truth has varied based on... Yeah, this is an interesting interaction. That's where I'd love to... I think there's a sort of two-part aspect here. It's both risks have truth and they have societal constructs and values. Because if I believe, say, just take outside of this for a moment and into the human rights world, if we believe, for instance... at one point that, one type of people have more rights than another type of people, we can have facts that back up the rationale for that. When we change and believe that actually slavery is something that, for instance, is not appropriate, then there's a whole series of facts that we have that back up why that's the case. So facts is not something we're short of as a human race, because they can justify values, and societal values shift. So what I'm interested in is, when you ask that question about bias, bias will evolve based on the values, and how do we know that? In New Zealand, to pick up the QUT point, they've been using a transparency initiative where they're making algorithms transparent in very much the same way there, where you have to be able to defend it. But then you're defending your bias and your ethics. But they're not necessarily available to everybody here. Not everyone knows or understands how you can even read an algorithm. Certainly I don't feel like I do.
Not sure we want them to, either.
No. So therefore, how do we open it up to a bit more societal engagement about this? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I've got an answer to your specific question. In fact, I don't. But I only have principles to apply. I mean, in a world where you need integrity, the only way I know how to get to integrity is by shining the light on whatever happens, and having openness of people to be able to inquire upon it, and that's the way. And because AI is just too complicated. If I looked at some AI code, I'd have no idea what it was saying unless someone explained it to me. Then I'm relying on someone else to interpret it to me. So we've got to rely on experts to do that. But by the very fact of shining light, of being willing to engage in that conversation and be held accountable, then you get to greater, the truth, or you get to a world where, that there is some balance in it. And I think that's what we've got to go. And what I worry most about is that lack of transparency, the black box world, where you just have no idea what's going on. And I think we as a society should push back at that. Anyone who brings in a product or something who's not willing to disclose it, then we should say, thank you very much, as good as it is, I'm not interested. So that'd be my view.
I've got one more question to ask before I turn to the audience. One of the journalists who's been writing about this in the Financial Review called me and asked me a question in relation to ethics. They had come upon an insurance agency or insurer who was working out the price point of what one of their customers was willing to pay. So price elasticity concept, which is, well, if I can keep on increasing the price and it doesn't actually impact on whether I have that customer or not, I can keep on doing so. So they were using AI to increase prices on those that weren't checking their prices and reduce prices on people that were. And so I was a bit horrified, I have to say, because I sort of thought it's supposed to work the other way around, isn't it? Customer principle, where if I'm loyal, I get some benefit for that. Actually, it's the opposite. And I thought that was an interesting one to unpack in terms of a practical example of ethics. How would you apply your principles to that?
Well, I mean, I think there is a responsibility on those who are setting the prices to do it in a transparent way. And I mean, I've been involved in pricing for years, and I'm sure you all said you got a really good deal from Telstra, right? So let's make it personal. Look, we would, I mean, on pricing, I think the issue is not about what the market will bear, it is about where value is created. Now, you will pay $1,800 for your iPhone 10. Is that justified? Well, you get value from it, so you choose to buy it. If it's purely around a sophisticated algorithm that is just trying to, basically price gouge, then I don't think it is right. And that's why we have regulators. That's why the ACCC exists, and so they're competent, consumer rights. So there's a check and balance there. And also remember, and we are not all victims, you have the right to say no. Now, what we got to be careful of is that there are some people who are not well enough informed, and we've got to make sure we have enough safeguards for them. But, also, we've got to be accountable for our own decisions as well. So it's in the middle of those, I'd say.
Yeah, I checked it with a regulator who said, well, the right price is the price someone's willing to pay. And I thought, well, I'm ringing up my insurance organisation today just to let them know I'm not happy.
Right. I can imagine. I think their answer would have been different if they had received 1,000 letters complaining. They would have a different answer.
Yeah, values. Yeah. Okay, next person we have over here. Thank you. Good name, your name and your organisation, please.
Hi, Ellie from CanStar. AI in the finance sector is being used more and more for credit scoring, lending applications, chatbots and virtual assistants. What ethical challenges does this present, and how should AI in banking be regulated?
This is the problem in AI. I mean, I'm not in the financial services sector, but look, I mean, if you're doing more data analytics to make a decision on someone's creditworthiness, I think it's fine to do the analysis. You do what you can, but at the end of the day, you've still got to make a judgment. You should make it apparent and transparent that this is the criteria that we use, and that's where I think transparency. And if you don't like the way they do it, then fine, go somewhere else. But if it's transparent, it's a perfectly valid way to do it. Today, if you're doing trying to get a loan, people go to credit agencies. There's lots of different parts. It's part of being part of society. But it's the transparency that we need about how they make those decisions. So, and then there does need to be a human element in making a judgment, because my financial history has no necessary bearing on what my future will be, and therefore I'm not aware of AI being able to predict my financial state in the next 2 months, but it'd be great if it could. But so I think that's where I'd go on that. So look, if if I applied the same standards in a conversation, if someone's going to make a decision about me, I'll say, well, how did you come to that decision? I just want to be able to know how they came to that decision. And I say the same principle applies when I'm dealing with an institution, be my view.
No, we had an interesting case study that we looked at where Amazon has a sort of gig economy in a way where they allow people to bid for algorithm development, and they have people in America and India who are doing so. And what they looked at some point was a human rights lens across it and said, wow, why is it that in this gig economy we're still getting an outcome where the Indians are being paid far less per gig than the Americans were? And this is despite it looking on the outside as though it was equal access. And so there was an unconscious bias in the market that they were trying to address in the end.
Right. Who was that?
Amazon.
Amazon, and they were paying a certain part of their community less.
Yeah, so that, for instance, as an example, in fact, I think we're part of it when we verify that we're not a robot. You choose how many of those photos are, traffic lights or cars or whatever. They were taking, say, someone was a puppy or a cat, and if they give that to 10,000 people, and then they end up with an algorithm that can differentiate between these two things, and then they sell that algorithm. So it's kind of like, they call it the mechanical Turk. It's part human, part computer.
I don't like being that predictable. I mean, I mean, human. I'm not sure we are. Well, maybe they're using an algorithm to prove something out, but so don't tick the right box. Be rebel.
But that's why they need to have 10,000 people do it, because then they can deal with the error. Yeah. For those that are willing to rebel. See, there you are, contrarian on facts sometimes. Right. There.
Yeah. I like being contrarian.
Okay, over here, thank you.
Graham Galloway from the Translational Research Institute. So we're involved in doing currently machine learning with input data. I'm interested about training data sets. And yeah, we currently get biased data because the people give informed consent come from a certain demographic or population of people that are interested in doing that. The advantage of artificial intelligence is that we have the ability to go into much bigger data sets, but who owns that data? What right do we have to access it? Are we going to insist on informed consent? And if we do insist on informed consent, then we run into the same problems of bias in artificial intelligence.
I think it's a very good statement. Look, I do have a strong view that data about yourself is your data, and you should manage how you give it out, and you need to manage it. And some of us, as I was saying before, some of you are quite happy to be much data out there about yourself as you like, and others are concerned, but it's your call. Now, in terms of access to big data sets, I would have an issue if data about me was in some data set that I wasn't aware of. I didn't give them permission. And especially if ever it was identifiable, I'd have a big issue. So I do think that we, who use those data sets, have a responsibility to make sure that we are, dealing with data that is, bona fide, that people are happy to be out there, because I'm not sure you can capture it all at the source. So,
Can I just add one point about the
yeah.
identifiable thing? That is, what may not be identifiable today, in a few years' time, could become identifiable, and that data still exists in that data set.
Yeah. Yeah, and...
Your genome is 100% identifiable to you, because that's the
yeah.
That happened in Norway when they were doing looking at cancer, and they ended up with that.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, and therefore things will change going forward. But I don't know the answer to that. But what we do.
And I've got the opportunity for one last question. You can see just how wide a variety the questions are that you've got, and it sort of looks at everything from what your values in your leadership and your solution sets are across a broad range. So it's wonderful that you've opened yourself up to having a chance for us to talk to you about artificial intelligence and to have the conversation begin. I'm keen on knowing what you think the next best step is for us as a nation to get to a point where we have a good and comfortable level of endorsement around where we're going with this.
Well, I do think it's very important that we, as a nation, I think the government has a role to play here. We should go at the speed that we feel comfortable going. I think the grave danger is if we get ahead of ourselves, where the community's at in their thinking. I think that's a grave danger. But on the other side, I do want to create a world of innovation of where we're pushing the limits in the use of technology, because we need to look at that balance point in terms of future competitiveness. So, but not at the cost of compromising our values and ethics. So, let's take the first step. Let's start putting some principles in. Won't be 100% right, but let's start there. Let's make sure that there's some controls, some oversight in place. Take that step, and then as it moves, we will be able to at least sort of hopefully move with it. Look, the other thing is that I am not personally aware of some of the enormous advancements that is happening out there. And so we do need to be very well plugged. It's like cyber security. There's things happening out there that we need to be aware of and to be conscious of. Same in AI, so we don't get caught out. Okay?
Well, thank you
That's it
very
from me.
much.
Thank you.
Yes, we've got to invite Kyle up. Thank you.
He's still right up here.